I never thought I'd come home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital to find someone ransacking my 10-year-old son's bedroom. But Tuesday afternoon proved that life still had surprises left to throw at me. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I'm an emergency room physician at Phoenix General Hospital. After dealing with everything from heart attacks to car accidents for over a decade, I thought I'd seen every kind of crisis imaginable. Turns out, I hadn't met Cheryl Pemberton yet. The first sign something was wrong came when I pulled into my driveway on Maple Street in the Willowbrook Estates subdivision. There was an unfamiliar silver BMW parked in front of my house, and I could hear voices coming from inside. Since my son Tyler was supposed to be at his after-school program until 5 o'clock, the house should have been empty. My ex-wife Linda lived across town, and we had a standing custody arrangement that everyone in the neighborhood knew about. Tuesday was definitely my day. I grabbed my medical bag from the passenger seat and approached the front door, fishing for my keys while trying to figure out who might be inside. The voices were coming from upstairs, specifically from Tyler's room, and one of them was definitely female, with that particular tone that screamed entitlement from 3 zip codes away. I'd heard that voice before at HOA meetings, usually complaining about something trivial like mailbox colors or the wrong species of flowers in someone's front yard. The front door was unlocked, which immediately set off alarm bells in my head. I'm obsessive about security, partly because of my job and partly because I'm a single father who worries about everything. I always lock that door, even when I'm just running to the mailbox. Someone had either picked the lock or had a key, and neither option was particularly comforting. I set my bag down quietly and listened. The female voice was giving instructions to someone else, talking about boxes and storage space and how this room would be perfect for her son's art supplies. That's when I realized who I was dealing with. Cheryl Pemberton, the self-appointed queen of Willowbrook Estates, had somehow gotten into my house and was apparently redecorating Tyler's bedroom to suit her own needs. Cheryl was 42 years old, with perfectly styled blonde hair that probably cost more than most people's car payments, designer workout clothes that had never seen actual exercise, and a collection of luxury handbags that she carried like shields against the common people. She drove that BMW like it was a weapon and treated every HOA meeting like she was addressing the United Nations. Her 12-year-old son Bradley was supposedly some kind of artistic genius who needed special accommodations for his creative development. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The voices became clearer as I reached the landing, and I could hear Cheryl talking on her phone while directing someone else to pack Tyler's belongings into cardboard boxes. She was discussing timeline and logistics like she was planning a military operation, completely comfortable with the fact that she was in someone else's home without permission. Tyler's bedroom door was wide open, and the scene inside made my blood pressure spike to dangerous levels. Cheryl stood in the middle of the room, wearing her signature white yoga pants and pink designer hoodie, barking orders at a young Hispanic woman who was clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Tyler's superhero posters had been stripped from the walls. His action figures were being shoved into boxes labeled Bradley's Art Storage, and his favorite stuffed elephant was sitting in what appeared to be a donation pile. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying the calm authority I'd developed from years of handling medical emergencies. "What exactly do you think you're doing in my son's bedroom?" Cheryl turned around with that smug expression she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the calculating look in her eyes, and her smile had all the warmth of a tax audit. The woman helping her immediately stopped packing and took a step back, clearly recognizing that she'd walked into something she didn't want to be part of. "Oh, Marcus," Cheryl said, not even having the decency to look embarrassed about being caught red-handed. "I was just about to call you. I'm helping transition this space for community use. According to HOA bylaw 37 subsection C, any residential space that remains unoccupied for more than 2 weeks can be reassigned for neighborhood storage purposes." I stared at her, wondering if she'd completely lost her mind or if this was just the natural evolution of her control freak tendencies. "Cheryl, This is my son's bedroom in my house. Tyler lives here every other week. And this isn't community property." She held up a folder full of official-looking documents, waving them like they were some kind of legal warrant. "I have all the proper authorization. The HOA conducted a survey and determined that this room was being underutilized. Bradley needs storage space for his art supplies. And frankly, it's wasteful to have an entire bedroom sitting empty when it could serve the community." That's when I noticed the key in her hand. She'd been holding it casually, but now she made a point of showing it to me, like it proved her authority to be there. I recognized it immediately as one of the spare keys I'd given to my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, for emergency situations. Cheryl must have convinced the elderly woman to hand it over under false pretenses. "Where did you get that key?" "Cheryl?" Her smile widened, revealing teeth that were just a little too white to be natural. "The HOA maintains emergency access to all properties for community safety purposes. We're simply exercising our authority to maximize neighborhood resources." I pulled out my phone and started recording, knowing that whatever happened next needed to be documented. Cheryl's eyes narrowed when she saw the camera, but she didn't back down. If anything, she seemed energized by the confrontation, like she'd been looking forward to this moment for months. "Maria," I said to the woman who'd been packing Tyler's things, "you don't have to be part of this. Mrs. Pemberton doesn't have any legal authority to be in my house. And you're not in trouble." Maria nodded gratefully and headed for the door, clearly wanting to escape whatever drama was about to unfold. Cheryl watched her go with obvious annoyance, then turned back to me with renewed determination. "You can record all you want, Marcus, but I have documentation proving that this room qualifies for community reassignment. Bradley is exceptionally talented, and his art could add real cultural value to the neighborhood instead of just sitting empty collecting dust." That's when I realized this wasn't just about storage space or HOA bylaws. This was about Cheryl's belief that her family's needs automatically trumped everyone else's, and her willingness to use any excuse to take what she wanted. She'd probably been planning this for weeks, waiting for the right opportunity to make her move. "I'm calling the police," I said, dialing 911 while keeping the camera rolling. Cheryl immediately pulled out her own phone and started making her own call, speaking loudly enough for my dispatcher to hear every word. "Yes. I need police at 427 Maple Street immediately. There's an aggressive man threatening me while I'm trying to conduct official HOA business. He's being very intimidating and I fear for my safety." The audacity was breathtaking. She was literally standing in my son's bedroom, packing his belongings into boxes for her own kids' use, and she was calling the police on me for being threatening in my own home. But this was classic Cheryl behavior, turning herself into the victim whenever someone challenged her authority. My dispatcher was still on the line, and I made sure to speak clearly for the recording. "Ma'am, I'm Dr. Marcus Thompson, and I've come home to find someone in my house without permission, going through my son's personal belongings. She claims to have HOA authorization, but she's essentially burglarizing my home." Cheryl continued her performance for her own dispatcher, describing me as unstable and potentially dangerous while she backed toward Tyler's window like she was planning an escape route. She kept mentioning that I was acting erratically and that she was just trying to do her job as HOA president, painting herself as a public servant under attack. Within 10 minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up outside, their red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in alternating colors of drama. I watched through Tyler's window as 4 officers got out, including Sergeant Rodriguez, whom I recognized from the hospital. We'd worked together on several cases where police officers had been injured in the line of duty. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," Cheryl called out as they climbed the stairs. This man became violent when I tried to explain the HOA's community storage initiative. I was just trying to help optimize underutilized space. Sergeant Rodriguez looked around Tyler's bedroom, taking in the boxes, the stripped walls, and Cheryl's official-looking documents. His partner, Officer Martinez, was examining the key Cheryl had been waving around like a badge of authority. "Ma'am," Sergeant Rodriguez said carefully, "can you explain exactly what authority you believe gives you the right to be in Dr. Thompson's home?" Cheryl launched into her explanation about HOA bylaws and community storage initiatives. But her story started falling apart under professional scrutiny. Officer Martinez asked to see the specific bylaw she was citing, and when she couldn't produce the actual text, he asked for contact information for the HOA's legal counsel. That's when things got interesting. I pulled out my own folder, one I'd been keeping ever since Cheryl had started her campaign of harassment against several families in the neighborhood. As a physician, I was used to documentation, and I'd been tracking her increasingly erratic behavior for months. "Officers," I said, handing over my records. "Mrs. Pemberton was removed as HOA president 6 months ago after multiple complaints about her conduct. She's been impersonating a HOA official and using that false authority to harass neighbors. I have documentation from the HOA management company confirming that she has no current authority." Cheryl's face went pale, then red, then pale again as the officers examined my documentation. Her carefully constructed story was crumbling, and she knew it. But instead of backing down, she doubled down on her victim narrative. "He's lying," she said, her voice rising to a pitch that could shatter glass. "I'm the president, and I have every right to optimize community resources. His son hasn't been here in weeks, and Bradley needs that storage space for his art supplies." Officer Martinez had been quiet during most of the exchange, but now he stepped forward with the kind of professional authority that comes from years of dealing with difficult people. "Ma'am, even if you were still HOA president, which our records indicate you're not, that wouldn't give you authority to enter someone's private residence without permission." That's when Cheryl made her final, fatal mistake. In her desperation to justify her actions, she admitted that she'd obtained the key from Mrs. Rodriguez by telling her there was a gas leak emergency that required immediate access to check all the houses on the block. "So you lied to an elderly neighbor to obtain unauthorized access to Dr. Thompson's home?" Sergeant Rodriguez asked. "It wasn't lying. It was community safety," Cheryl insisted, but even she seemed to realize how weak that sounded. The officers exchanged glances, and I could see them reaching the same conclusion I had. This wasn't just trespassing or breaking and entering. This was a systematic pattern of fraud and harassment that had been building for months. Sergeant Rodriguez pulled out his handcuffs with the resigned expression of someone who'd seen this movie too many times before. "Mrs. Pemberton, you're under arrest for burglary in the 2nd degree, criminal trespass, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." As they read her rights, Cheryl made one last desperate appeal to me, tears streaming down her face in what was probably meant to look like genuine remorse, but came across as pure manipulation. "Marcus, please, I was just trying to help the community. Bradley really does need that storage space. And your son has so many advantages already. Can't you find it in your heart to share?" I looked at this woman who had spent months making my life difficult, who had broken into my home and tried to steal my son's belongings for her own child's benefit, who had lied to elderly neighbors and impersonated officials. And all I could do was shake my head. "The only thing I understand, Cheryl, is that you broke into my house and tried to steal my son's childhood because you thought your kid deserved it more." As the officers led her away in handcuffs, still protesting her innocence and insisting she was being persecuted for trying to maintain community standards, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction that justice was finally being served. But this was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the investigation revealed that Cheryl had been running similar schemes throughout the neighborhood, targeting families she considered problematic and using her false authority to harass them into compliance or relocation. The Martinez family had moved out after she'd filed 17 separate complaints against them in 6 months. The Nguyen family had relocated after she'd organized petition drives against their traditional Vietnamese garden. The Washington family had been considering leaving after constant noise complaints about their children playing in their own backyard. Detective Sarah Kim from the Fraud Division put together a comprehensive case that showed Cheryl's systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation. She'd maintained detailed files on multiple families, coordinated with other neighbors to file simultaneous complaints, and used her false authority to make life miserable for anyone who didn't fit her vision of appropriate suburban living. The criminal charges were just the beginning. 7 families filed a class action lawsuit for harassment, discrimination, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The settlement was substantial enough to send a message to anyone else who might consider following Cheryl's example, but the real satisfaction came from what happened to the neighborhood after Cheryl's arrest. Her removal had lifted a weight that none of us had realized we'd been carrying. Suddenly, neighbors who'd been afraid to interact began having real conversations. Families who'd been considering moving decided to stay and make improvements they'd been afraid would attract Cheryl's attention. Tyler had the best reaction to the news of Cheryl's conviction. "Dad," he said as we were putting his superhero posters back up on his bedroom walls, "does this mean I can play basketball in the driveway without someone calling the cops?" "Son," I told him, "you can play basketball, have friends over, listen to music, and be exactly the amazing kid you are without anyone trying to make you feel like you don't belong here." The neighborhood transformed over the following months. The HOA was restructured with new leadership focused on actual community building rather than petty control. Property values went up, not because of artificial restrictions, but because families actually wanted to live in a place where they could be themselves. Cheryl served 18 months in county jail and was ordered to pay substantial restitution to the families she'd harassed. Her son Bradley, the artistic genius who supposedly needed Tyler's bedroom for storage, turned out to be about as talented as any other 12-year-old, with access to art supplies and an overly indulgent mother. 6 months after her release, I received a letter from Cheryl attempting to apologize, but it read more like a justification for her actions combined with a request that we all move past this unfortunate misunderstanding. She still didn't seem to understand that breaking into people's homes and stealing their children's belongings wasn't a community service project. I showed the letter to my new neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who'd moved into Cheryl's old house after it was sold to pay her legal bills. Mrs. Chen had transformed the sterile, beige landscape into a beautiful garden that reflected her Chinese heritage. Exactly the kind of diverse expression that Cheryl had spent years trying to eliminate. Some people never learn, Mrs. Chen said, shaking her head as she read Cheryl's attempt at reconciliation. "That's okay," I replied, tossing the letter in the recycling bin where it belonged. The rest of us did. As I write this story, it's been 2 years since I found Cheryl Pemberton in Tyler's bedroom, packing up his belongings like she owned the place. Tyler is now 12 years old and thriving in a neighborhood where kids can be kids without someone documenting their every move as evidence of declining community standards. The best part is that our little corner of Willowbrook Estates has become exactly what Cheryl claimed she was trying to protect. Property values are strong. Neighbors look out for each other, and families choose to live here because it's a place where diversity is celebrated rather than merely tolerated. Sometimes justice isn't just about punishment. Sometimes it's about removing the obstacles that prevent a community from becoming what it was always meant to be. Cheryl Pemberton spent years trying to control who belonged in our neighborhood, never realizing that the person who didn't belong was her.